Peace. Well, here's a room full of people, so peace. This electronic stuff is always deep. First, let me thank Workers World for inviting me to speak and to talk about the 40th anniversary of our victory over government terrorism, which was August 5th, 1985. Let me also begin by making note that with me this evening here live is Sister Latifah Carter, who is one of the members of the New York Eight. And also my wife, Dory Clay, is also here. And let me just make note that during the course of our trial, actually, my wife and a number of other comrades who were grand jury resistors actually spent more time behind the wall than any of the New York Eight, except, well, I think all, maybe Shimaranga, yeah. But first, like I said, I'm very happy to be here. And I'm also glad that the New York Eight and the struggle around our case and the thousands of people who were involved in our victory is a contributing factor to Black August. It was somewhat us recognizing that. You know, sometimes things pass so fast and you say, oh, wow, it's 40 years and wow, it's August and it's Black August. And so that was kind of a wake-up call for us, because you're doing your work and you don't really take time sometimes to recognize how time passes. And we must always recognize our victories, because they're not personal individual victories, but they're people's victories. And those contributions have to be made. It's not an individual decision whether you should or not. It's a contribution to the history of the struggle for liberation. So in that sense, we have to kind of say, yeah, let's come back. Let's make sure we recognize that. A number of our comrades are not with us now. We're in the New York Eight. Sister Vida Plummer, as Monica said, also Coltrane Shimaranga in that regard. And see, this is the thing when you're married. My wife is back there telling me, raise your voice louder, louder. So I'm getting these directions. Y'all don't see that, but I'm looking at her. She's saying, raise your voice, raise your voice. And so, but those contributions and Robin's son, Robert Taylor, is no longer with us. And I can only say that I'm now the chairperson of the Simple Talk movement. Probably the last thing on the planet that I would want to be, given the leadership that Sister Violet Plummer gave us and led us through. In fact, for my own personal contributions to my own revolutionary development, the two people who stand out for me in my life was Sister Violet Plummer and Jim Foreman, who was one of the members of SNCC. Jim Vi, just in terms of the struggle of what does it mean to be a revolutionary, it's not just talking, it's doing. And that she left me with and finishing the gig. And Jim Foreman just ideologically to let me understand that you can't go anywhere if you don't have clarity in terms of the ideology that you're following, because you're following something. And so the struggle is always to be clear on what you're following and to make it correct in terms of this path. So before I just start talking about the New York Eight and the significance of that, let me also mention that while we're having this meeting, we also have a meeting at Sister's Place, our headquarters tonight, because a part of should also speak to something that kind of gets pushed to the side, and that's Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, August 29th and 30th, 20 years ago now, 20 years ago. But that's so significant because in that, I think it was Jelani Carr, the writer, who said Katrina was probably the first of a series of things that made the issue of Black citizenship a question in terms of what happened. You know, almost 2,000 people died in that. And one of the things that he raised was that they said it was a natural disaster. And he says, I have great contention with that. It was a natural phenomenon because floods and rains and storms are natural phenomena. The tragedy was human. The tragedy was a concrete expression of the oppression of people and the lengths to which people will go to preserve property, to acquire property, and to continue the oppression of people. So Katrina's story is that story, and we should always remember it. When it comes up, it should be an integral part of Black August because of what happened. Spike Lee did a movie when the levees broke. There's another one called Katrina Babies, but people should just take note while we're in Black August to make yourself available of seeing those, because that's a part of history that you need to know and pass it on, like as the Silas says, passing on the tradition in terms of what's happening. So I just wanted to make note of that. October 17th, 1984, 500 agents of the government's Joint Terrorist Task Force. This task force was really the motion for the National Police Force. It was a combination of the FBI at the national level, co-opting and incorporating police units at every level of local and state governments and integrating them into this national police force. One was one against terrorism, the other one was against bank robbery. But on October 17, 1984, we were rounded up that night and carried down to the FBI headquarters. This raid went on in a number of boroughs. Sister Latifah and I were arrested at Smalls Paradise, which was a jazz spot up in Harlem. And we were doing a program there called Jazz Comes to Fight Back, to bring jazz back into our community. At least probably 100 or so agents came in, machine guns and stuff, arrested Latifah and I. And you know they didn't make a mistake when they say to you, you know, Clay, and then you say, oh, okay, they know who I am. They pulled machine guns on us, put us in a car. And before we got into the car, then we knew the level of what was happening, because one of the key agents in the case came up to us and introduced himself. Now, he wasn't part of the whole tactical force with machine guns and guns. He's in the suit and the tie and real slick, very calm, very patient. And they took us down to FBI headquarters, took us upstairs, separated us, took me upstairs in one direction, walked me into an office, no handcuffs, anything, walked me into an office, they cut the lights on, it's FBI headquarters, sat me down and said, look, we know everything. And he said, okay, okay, you know everything. But what they wanted me to do, they wanted to see whether I would talk. They wanted to see whether I would snitch. And so that's why the calm, you know, very, you know, pleasant voice, you know, very calm demeanor. And we sat down at the table and he says, we're arresting under the Hobbs Act. That was the initial indictment. And that was crossing state lines. And then we talked a little bit. He said, we know everything. We think you should talk to us about this and stuff. So I just smiled. I said, you know, Omowale, he has one of these kind of pleasant kind of attitudes, you know, stuff doesn't tend to faze me. So he smiled, I smiled. I said, I don't think I'm getting out of here, though. That smile was going to do it. But then he said he wasn't going to get anywhere. Then he took me downstairs. Now he takes me into a place and showing me pictures. Now this is interesting. They're showing pictures. They had us under surveillance. Now we understand the magnitude of the surveillance. They almost had us under for a year and a half to 2 years, like 24 hours, 7 days a week. They had us under surveillance. The amount of money they spent was awesome. And they took me downstairs, started showing me pictures, just in our bathrobes, coming, going to work. I mean, just every level. They showed me Dory going in and out of and they had the code names for each of us. So they're telling me all of this because what they want to do is try to say, we are overwhelmed with the amount of information we have. So you can't get away. This is it. So I didn't say anything again. I just smiled and said, then they took me into another room. The third room was the most interesting one because that's the one where they took this guy sat there, this FBI agent, and he wanted to act like he wanted me to say something. So he said, so look, if you're going to talk about this, he said, look, Shamaranga hasn't had a job in 20 years. Viola, this and that. I did stuff, started denigrating and everything. And I just smiled again. He says, so you're not going to say anything? I said, so you have gathered that now. Then he took the pen. He took the pen and he went and tore the paper up and looked at me and says, you're going to do 20 years. And I smiled again. And then they took me out and put me in another room. And when you put me in that room, now we're starting to gather in that room because each of us has been in our own situations. Sister Latifah, I heard her because she wasn't telling them anything. So you heard her screaming, I ain't giving you my fingerprints, I ain't giving you nothing. We had to tell Latifah, no, it's cool. That's stuff, I'm not telling you nothing, I'm not giving you nothing. And the bottom line is after that, we were put in a room and now we're gonna face the court, and that stuff. But that's how it started. That's how the New York 8 started. That's when the 8 of us became the New York 8 and became actually the New York 8 Plus. And I just want to go through some things because with the rise of this notion of the right and this issue that was discussed, fascism, we have to talk about that for a minute too. It's important to understand the things that they were already putting in place at that time as they were changing this quote constitutional democracy and whatever, the things that they were putting in place and how quickly they were doing it. One was we were arrested under what they conceptually call the preemptive strike. Now we're familiar with that because we're familiar with Israel's attack on the neighboring Arab countries. And then the excuse for it was always, it's a preemptive strike. They're getting ready to do something, so we have to act before they do it. That was the theoretical premise of why they arrested us. They hadn't done anything yet, but we got to move before they do. And so, preemptive strike. The second one which we faced, which was first a surprise to us, was we're thinking we're going to get bail. And so little did we know that that week that we got arrested, they had passed a new law. It was the No Bail Act. Now this act kind of modeled on South Africa. The premise of innocence was thrown out the window. Instead of you having the right to bail, the presumption of innocence. The problem is when they institute the no bail law, you now have to prove that you're one, not a danger to society, and you're not a risk of flight. And so now we ended up being in a bail hearing, the first one in the history of the United States. We were the longest bail hearing in the history of the United States, even to this day. How long it was, because now we had to prove that we had the right to bail, not whether we could afford to bail, but do we have the right to bail? So this is the second thing that they constructed, was the no bail law and its application. The Colombo family was arrested later on, within a week of that, and it was applied to them too. We had a good opportunity to talk with the Colombos in maximum security too. The third thing was, and this was an interesting one. This was a conspiracy case. They charged us with conspiring to break people out of jail, conspiring to expropriate from armored trucks. Those were the two principal ones. They also weapons charges and da. But the third one was, historically, a spouse cannot testify against their spouse. This is like one of the landmarks of the law. But what they said was we were in a conspiracy. And since we're in a conspiracy and a husband or a wife can't testify against the other. They said it was a conspiracy. There are 8 of you. So what we will do is that we will create 8 grand juries. And they call this theory, theoretically in the law, a Chinese wall. And this Chinese wall was to say like Fedora, she wouldn't talk about me, but they created 7 other grand juries that she could talk about everyone else except me. My grand jury, I would be part of someone else's grand jury. And this is this Chinese wall theory. The bottom line is, these are all the things they did to put in place. And the bottom line came, also, they had a snitch who was from our midst, Howard Bonds, who they had been working, we're not sure how long, but he was now, to them, this was their ace in the hole. They had Howard Bonds. They didn't understand that he could never remember anything about anything. But the bottom line was, once we had our bail hearing, we did all get out on bail. We actually won our bail hearing. It was like trials. Each one was like a trial, but we finally won our bail hearing. And to show you how desperate they were, Coltrane Shimaranga, who was went to Harvard graduate, he owed money in the Harvard library for books he hadn't returned. So their last-ditch effort to keep him in jail, he was the last one. They went to Judge Carter, Judge Robert Carter, who was the judge, and said, we have one other thing, Judge. And he said, what? They said, we have this case from the library at Harvard. They tried to turn it into a maximum case that he owes libraries. I saw Carter, and Carter's an interesting guy. He looked at him and said, what? He said, you would bring that into my court. But the end result was, even Shimaranga got out. We also found out after being out a short while, they put us back in jail again because they wanted fingerprint and handwriting exemplars. Now they had all of that information, but they knew that we would not snitch, we would not confess to anything. So they used that to put us back in jail again. So we all went back to jail again. And fortunately, when the final indictment comes down, there's no reason for them to be investigating anymore. So when the final indictment came down, they arrested us in October, most of us got out around November, December. They put us back in jail, like I think in February. And then when the final indictment came down, we were let out again. So now we're out and now we're facing the trial. I was chosen to go pro se. Now, there were 2 lawyers in our group, Roger and Yvette Kelly. They were lawyers. I was chosen to go pro se because I talked a lot. But most importantly, I was the propagandist for our group. And they said, this is not a legal case. This is a political case. It's winning the jury over, not to the law, but to them to understand that we're not criminals. And that was my task. And so the case went on from February. In June, there was a break in the case. And just to show you the nature of politics, Ross, who was Roth, who was the attorney, prosecutor for the state, and I can't think of the other woman's name. I'll think of it in a second. They ran into Viola, and Roth and his wife ran into Viola on 34th Street. And this is interesting. He's now trying to put us in jail for 100 years. They charged us with 5 RICO counts. Each carries 20 years. That's what they do. He runs into Coltrane Shimaranga and Viola on 34th Street with his wife. When they see Coltrane and Viola, he says, oh, honey, I want you to meet Coltrane Shimaranga and Viola Plummer. We're engaged in this trial that's going on. I just want you to meet them like they were friends. To show you the insanity of it, like they were friends. And I remember Viola told us that, but do you believe he introduced us like we were like buddies? He's trying to put us away forever. But that's just because of the nature. Ross ended up being the head of Human Rights Watch. And he passed away not that long ago. But he ended up being the head of Human Rights Watch in terms of that. The case went on. I mean, I don't want to take you through so much the trial. It was back and forth. But the key thing was our job was to win the jury over that we were not criminals. And I think we did that successfully. We did it with the evidence. We did it with our judges, our lawyers, and how they took apart the government's case. But I think the most important thing in it was that they charged us with a conspiracy to commit conspiracies. And I can tell you, when the trial was over and we were found innocent of all the major charges, we had a party, victory party, and all the jurors came to the victory party, except the ones who initially wanted to prove us, say we were guilty, but they were beat back. They didn't come. I think it was 2 of them, but everyone else came to the victory party. There was this white woman who was a work for the post office, and later on she said, "So I was suspect of the government." She said, "I work for the post office." Some other folks came and they told us, they said, "We were so nervous because when we saw how much surveillance they were doing of you, we saw they were probably surveilling us. So we didn't want to talk. We were very, nervous about that." The other thing was that when during the course of the trial, I ran into Judge Carter running in Central Park, and we were coming in the other directions, and we ran into each other. And the Judge Carter told her, he said, "Mr. Claude, so you're running in the park?" I said, "Yes, Judge Carter." So we're standing there talking, and he says, "But Mr. Clay, I don't think it's a good idea for us to be standing talking to each other." So I said, "Yeah, you think that? They're watching me too, huh, Judge Carter?" And he said, it was interesting. After the case, and they tried to turn, when they lost the case, they tried to still turn it into, let's get the maximum amount. And Judge Carter said, "No, you lost the case." So there were some gun charges, and not that we guns, but it was just, they took gun charges and made them part of the conspiracy cases. Once we were found innocent of that, they couldn't charge us again, double jeopardy. So the bottom line is they really lost the case, and they really lost a major, major case, because with all of the 500, and I can only tell you, the night we were arrested, they came to our house. Roger, they arrested in the middle of Flatbush Avenue and Midwood Street. Maybe 100 agents surrounding him with guns, had him get down on his knees in the middle of Flatbush Avenue. Dory and Mama and Roger's wife Wanda in the house with our kids, our 4 kids. They came in there, and Dory was saying, "This is a local show." They had a bazooka. Literally, they came in with combat boots, but they had a bazooka. And I remember Gil said to Dory, "A bazooka?" She said, "Isn't that long thing like that?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "They came with a bazooka." I've seen pictures of that guy standing outside the house with a bazooka, in terms of that. So it was really to create a sense of terror, to make it, they must have done something, because why would they use this many agents to arrest somebody unless they had been found guilty? So really, our case really became fighting back against the propaganda that was put out there. The case itself was not substantive that they had. The snitch that they had that goes and be really good could never remember anything because he was making stuff up. And so they lost the case, and it was a major, major case they lost. And so it was a victory. And I'll say this last point, because some people might have some questions. One of the things was people came to our court every single day. The court was packed. Gil Noble did a show with Dory and some other folks, and it kind of blew the secrecy of everything, and shows you the power of TV. Because as soon as that show was on that Sunday, I'm on the train, and somebody said, "Oh, you were on TV today." Shows you the power of TV. Were you the one that was on TV? Yeah, that's him. Yeah, they came to your house like that, so like that. But it was really a victory because the people came out and supported